You know, we tend to think of our national parks as these timeless, untouchable places, right? Forever wild. But what if I told you they're actually on the brink, facing this silent crisis from threats both inside and, believe it or not, outside their borders? So today, we're going to dig into not just the problems, but some of the incredible, really innovative ideas that could actually save our planet's wild heart.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We'll kick things off by looking at the huge pressures our parks are under. Then we'll dive into this amazing story of hope, the comeback of Yellowstone's wolves. That story will lead us straight into some brilliant new ways of thinking about how to design nature reserves. From there, we'll zoom out to look at a super ambitious global goal to protect 30% of the planet. And we'll wrap up with a really important question. What happens when we, as a people, start to lose our connection to nature?
Okay, so let's get right into it. The first big issue is this strange paradox. The very way we show our love for these places, by visiting them, is also one of the biggest things threatening them. It's a tough pill to swallow.
I know, it sounds a little dramatic, right? Loving them to death, but it's actually true. The sheer number of people flocking to these natural wonders is putting a kind of strain on their ecosystems that they were just never built to handle. So what does that strain actually look like? Just look at these numbers for a second. It's staggering. In only 50 years, visitors to U.S. national parks went from under 8 million to almost 240 million. That's not just a small increase, it's an explosion. Just try to imagine the extra traffic, the pollution, the simple wear and tear on these supposedly protected lands.
And this isn't just a US thing, but the problem looks really different depending on where you are in the world. In many less developed nations, you have these incredibly biodiverse parks facing threats born of poverty. People are driven to illegal logging or poaching just to survive. But then in the US, our parks are dealing with problems of prosperity, things like massive overcrowding and damage from all our recreational toys.
You know, there's a reason people often call these parks islands of biodiversity, because that's what they are. They're under constant siege. You've got air pollution so bad it messes with the views over 90% of the time. You have commercial development like mining and logging pushing right up against their borders. Invasive species like wild boars are tearing up the landscape, and poachers are still illegally taking native animals.
So that really begs the question, right? What happens when a key piece of one of these islands just vanishes? Well, to really see the ripple effects in action, let's turn to probably the most famous ecological comeback story of our time, the tale of the Yellowstone wolf.
So, for about 70 years, Yellowstone was a park without its top predator. The wolves were completely hunted out by the mid-1920s, and for all those decades, the park's ecosystem was just off. It was out of balance in ways people didn't even realize at the time. It wasn't until they were brought back in the 90s that things really started to turn around. Okay, so to really get why the return of the wolves was such a big deal, you have to see what went wrong when they were gone. Without that main predator, the whole web of life in the park just started to unravel. And this is a textbook example of what scientists call a trophic cascade. It's like a domino effect that tumbles all the way down the food chain. With no wolves, the elk population went through the roof. So what did they do? They ate everything, especially the young trees along the rivers. That led to more soil erosion. No trees meant no food for beavers, so they vanished. Scavengers like bears and eagles lost a major food source, wolf kills. And coyotes, their numbers skyrocketed. The entire system was completely out of whack.
But then, the wolves came back. And almost right away, things started to change. This reintroduction was this massive ecological experiment. And honestly, the results were nothing short of incredible. So the wolves didn't just bring down the elk population, they actually changed the elk's behavior. They kept them moving, so they couldn't just stand around and munch on the same patch of trees all day. This gave the riverside plants a chance to finally grow back. Wolf kills, once again, provided food for scavengers, and coyote numbers dropped back to where they should be. The balance was slowly, but surely, coming back.
So here's the big takeaway from all this. The wolf in Yellowstone, it's the perfect example of what's called a keystone species. Think about the keystone in a stone arch, that one stone at the very top. If you pull it out, the whole thing comes crashing down. That's what the wolf is to this ecosystem. This story just proves how deeply connected everything really is.
So that whole Yellowstone story, it's a huge lesson. It teaches us that just putting a fence around an island isn't going to cut it. We need to be smarter. And that brings us to some really cool, innovative solutions in how we design and protect these wild places.
And one of the smartest ideas out there is something called a buffer zone. The concept is actually pretty simple, but is genius. You have your super protected inner core, right? but you surround it with this outer area where local communities can still use the resources, but in a sustainable way. It stops the park from being this hard-edged us versus them border.
And if you want to see this in action, look no further than Costa Rica. They've basically made this their national playbook. They've created these massive mega reserves with a protected core and these buffer zones where local people aren't just allowed to be there, they are active partners in conservation. And the result? They've actually reversed deforestation while boosting their economy. It's incredible.
And this right here is the magic ingredient. It's a total win-win. Instead of shutting people out and creating conflict, this approach makes it economically smart for the people who live there to protect the park. You basically turn potential enemies of conservation into its biggest champions.
So, if this model works so well, the next logical question is, how big can we go with this? And the vision among conservation biologists is, well, it's huge. It's ambitious, but they argue it is absolutely necessary for our own survival.
First, let's just get a sense of where we are right now. Take a look at this. Only about 6% of the world's land is really truly protected from harmful human activities. And even if you're generous and you lump in all the other types of protected areas, you only get to about 15%. That leaves the vast majority of our planet completely vulnerable.
And this is the goal, 30%. Now, why 30%? It's not just some random number. Scientists see it as this critical tipping point, the absolute minimum we need to protect to save most of Earth's biodiversity and keep our own ecosystems stable. The gap between where we are now and where we need to be is enormous.
When you get right down to it, these protected areas aren't just for the animals, they're for us. Think of it like a long-term insurance policy for humanity. It's an ecological insurance policy that protects our clean air, our water, and the very stability of the planet that we depend on.
Okay, but there's one last challenge, and this one might be the trickiest of all. It's not about science or politics. It's about us and our own personal relationship with the natural world.
And the trend is pretty undeniable, right? More and more of us are growing up in cities, farther away from truly wild places. Our lives are spent looking at screens. We have this whole generation that's more plugged into technology than any before, but also less connected to the actual physical planet.
And that leaves us with this really tough, lingering question for the future. Because all the science, all the amazing conservation plans and buffer zones, they all hinge on one thing: people caring enough to make them happen. So we have to ask ourselves, if we let ourselves forget what wild even is, who's going to be left to fight for it?